what I was going to say in Mel's own words, he loves to read what Kaplan's reading. So you not only get the depth of Kaplan, but the breadth and the context of how Kaplan's own thought was evolving. That's quite a precious gift, and for that we're very thankful and very appreciative, Mel, that you're spending time with the Mefarshei Hazon Kaplan, people who have committed to continue their lifelong journey of Jewish learning with a particular reference to continuing to learn more about Kaplan. So I want to thank also Caitlin Hayes, who's a board member of the Kaplan Center, for being with us, serving as our Zoom gabbai, and aiding Mel in getting the text up that will be of interest to us. So, as they say, without any further ado, Mel, we're yours to learn with you.
Okay, can you hear me, everybody? We're a very small group, but I hope you will excuse a rather formal presentation, which I'm going to make. Most of my texts are from the Kaplan Diary. This is perhaps in the nature of an advertisement, because as many of you know, I published a number of volumes of selections, and it's really Kaplan's mind made public is really what it is. And so there are lots of sermons. I don't know, Hillel, if you're still actively involved in congregational work, and Myra, you will find in my volumes Kaplan on Torah, Kaplan on God, Kaplan on ethics, Kaplan on Zionism. You will find all of the different elements. Are we seeing you, Jeffrey? Do you intend that we see you? I don't see my face. Not that I want to see my face and my bald head, but that's usually the case with the speaker. You see, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Yeah, you're unmuted.
Caitlin, I unmuted. Caitlin, can you switch us to speaker view?
Yeah.
So that,
yes, I can.
Okay, thank you.
We're currently on speaker view, so.
Okay.
It should be that as Mel speaks, he will be the one that everybody sees in the recording.
As we speak, yeah.
Okay.
So the point is that I've been reading Kaplan's works for a very, very long time. And what I have found most interestingly is Kaplan's emphasis not on community and not on civilization, which is what one would expect, but I have found Kaplan's emphasis on the individual over. Caitlin, again, I see your lovely face. I don't see myself. There I am. Okay. Not that I like seeing myself, but that's the way it usually works. Okay. Now, in terms of what Kaplan puts in the diary, he says that the material, which is too complicated for the congregation and too radical for his rabbinical students at the seminary, and that's the material that he puts in the diary. And so it's very, very interesting to me that having said that, what really deeply concerns him and what he doesn't speak that much about is the individual. Now, the point is that I do not want to contribute to the primary disease of the modern era, which is the preoccupation with self, which is the narcissism that characterizes so much of our behavior. I want to emphasize the way in which the concern with the individual leads to the common good. And it takes the form of what Kaplan means by salvation. That is a key concept for Kaplan. He came upon it rather early in his life. Even though it's a bit uncomfortable because it seems Christian, but it is a good biblical term, Yeshua. Shavtem Mayim Bisason, we used to dance to when we were young, Mimaneha Yeshua. Kaplan equates salvation with the yearning for self-realization. And he puts it that way. It's not the achievement of self-realization, not the achievement of self-fulfillment, which is the key component of salvation, but it is the yearning. And quite a long time ago, I have suggested that we use the term shleimut, which Kaplan himself uses at one point in the 1930s as an alternative to the concept of salvation. Shleimut, our self-perfection and our self-fulfillment and our self-realization. So I want to turn now to the first text. Caitlin, will you put up the first text so we can read it together? This text comes from, Caitlin, would you put up the first text? Yes, this text comes from The Meaning of God in Modern Jewish Religion, which I feel is Kaplan's best work. And if you're interested, Myra, in getting into Kaplan, you might start with this work. And he says the following: Jewish civilization is the collective effort of the Jewish people to organize their community life so that it may yield a maximum of self-realization. I feel in a certain way that this summarizes Kaplan's whole program in one sentence, that the purpose of Jewish civilization is the cultivation, is the maximalization of the personality, of the mind, of the ability of the individual. And self-realization implies the recognition of the selfhood. We're talking about the selfhood of the individual, and we're talking about our collective selfhood, which is the Jewish people. Okay, you can take this down now, Caitlin. So one might say that insofar as Kaplan is concerned, the purpose of the group, the goal of the group, is the benefit of each individual. In other words, Kaplan feels very, very strongly that the group itself does not have a purpose apart from the benefit of each member in the group. When we get into group purposes, we end up, insofar as Kaplan is concerned, with a kind of chauvinism that we see, especially in Israel, at the present moment. Kaplan was very, very concerned with the issue of chauvinism. He used the expression Jewish nationalism for a very, very long time. And in the 1940s, when it became apparent that Judaism was going to be a state, he started to use the term peoplehood and ceased to use the word nationalism. Kaplan, in other words, is not a statist. There are many Zionists that are statists for whom the ultimate goal is a state of the Jewish people. And Kaplan assumed that there would be a state of the Jewish people, but above the state of the Jewish people stands Jewish civilization. In other words, the state must be the embodiment of Jewish civilization and its values. And those values are primarily the values of democracy, the values of equality, the values of justice for all is what the state of the Jewish people ought to embody. So one might say that Kaplan represents the Americanization of Judaism, of Jewish civilization. And I'm very, very content with that as an interpretation of Kaplan. And if we understand the way in which it emphasizes the sanctity of the individual, the equality of the individual, it does not contribute to the narcissism that so many of us are guilty of. It rather points to the matter of growth on the part of each person, no matter how much of a minority they are, and the matter of creativity. And this is illustrated in my next text, which comes from the diary and is, as a matter of fact, the first entry in the diary. Kaplan was speaking around in 1913 to menorah societies, and they were the precursors of the Hillel organizations on colleges and universities. And he spoke at Harvard, and he started the diary with the notes for the speech that he was giving at that point. And this is 1913. And what he says is, religion is primarily a social phenomenon. To grasp its reality, which we sort of expect of Kaplan, of course, to grasp its reality, to observe its workings, and further its growth, we must study its functioning in some social group. Well, that's Kaplan. But the individual and his development or perfection may constitute the sole aim of religion. In other words, the point of religion is the perfection of each individual. And that's really what we're interested in and moving up on the scale, on the moral scale, and on the midot scale. Kaplan has in mind, in saying this, a protest against William James and Alfred North Whitehead, who defined religion as what one does with one's solitude, one's aloneness. And of course, that's an aspect of religion, is what we do in the solitude and in our being alone. But the point is that for Kaplan, it's a matter of the perfection of the individual, which cannot occur outside the group. And when one talks about the perfection of the individual, Kaplan has in mind something very specific. It's not only the particular skills that the individual wants to develop to be this or that other thing, but it is the general societal context in which the individual has the freedom to develop his own skills and what he sees as his own destiny. It's equality before the law that Kaplan was concerned with. It's the other aspects of one's political context. And I recommend a book to you, which is really, really wonderful, by a man named George Kateb, K-A-T-E-B, who taught in Princeton, who wrote about Emerson and self-reliance and talks about the development of these political issues, equality before the law, due process. And what Kateb informs us, which is really very interesting to me, is the way in which political contexts can become individual virtues. In other words, due process, which is a political issue, can be something that characterizes our own behavior. In other words, we give other people the freedom and the space which they deserve in terms of the evidence for whatever they believe. Okay, I want to move to the next text, Caitlin, which is text number 3, which again has to do with the individual. This text has a very interesting context and a very interesting history. You'll notice the date. It's May 1939. Kaplan was in Palestine and had been in Jerusalem at the Hebrew University for 2 years. And he was at the end of his time there at the time that the white paper came out, where Britain restricted the immigration of Jews to Palestine. And of course, the Yishuv was up in arms and Kaplan was up in arms. But in this notation, in his reaction, he deals on a very general, sophisticated level in reacting to what the British were doing. And he wants to emphasize the use of man's reason. It is man's function to assert the right of the mind to exist, he says. And so the British should be more reasonable. To be reasonable is to look in terms of the larger picture and not merely in terms of their policies and their needs at the moment. And then he says, so it is just as it is the function of the person in general, of people in general, to exercise reason, so it is the Jew's function to assert the right of human individuality, which is the most important function of the mind. And that is related to the Jews' minority status, which the Jews seem to be condemned. It's the opportunity which the Jews must exploit to affirm the right of the human being to exist, to be something else besides a creature of the herd, to be himself. In other words, the minority life of Jews throughout the Middle Ages confers upon the Jews a special obligation, and that is the obligation to affirm the dignity of the individual, which is fallen upon the Jew to defend, is what the Jew should live for as a Jew. In other words, he's saying something in addition here, is that the purpose of Jewish life is the encouragement of human individuality and the rights of and the context of life, so that It allows each individual to be themselves. Okay, you can take that off, Caitlin, now. And in emphasizing human individuality, Kaplan talks very often about need. When I met Kaplan, that was a primary context, a primary issue in his thinking, was the matter of need. Heschel talks about need, and he sees it as the lowest form of motivation, is to think in terms of what we need. But what Kaplan was saying to me in 1972 was the following formulation: there is enough in the world to meet our need, but not our greed for power and pleasure. And Kaplan, being the rabbi, tied this to the Shema. Lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem. He said to me over and over again, you shall not be seduced by your heart or by your eyes, in which he interpreted to mean your pleasure or your power. And you should, because if you do, if your needs become greeds, you end up like Harvey Weinstein, and that's not a direction we want to go. Kaplan, in his opposition to Heschel in the 1940s, discovered the humanistic psychologists of that period, which is Jung and Maslow and Erich Fromm, which I think we read many years ago when we were young. And what's particularly important, and what Kaplan focused on, is the hierarchy of needs which we find in Maslow. The biological needs: food, drink, shelter, sex, and sleep. And of course, sleep becomes all the more important as we get a little bit older. And then the point for Kaplan is that you need is a hierarchy. So you move up to safety needs, the need for law, the need for order, the need for freedom from fear, and you move up to the belongingness needs, the need for community, family, love, to be in relationships, to the cognitive needs, the needs to understand, the needs for the truth. And we say in our prayers, Adonai Elohechem Emet, the Lord your God is truth. Well, that's an interpretation of Jules Harlow from Sim Shalom. I don't think Jeremiah meant that when he said Adonai. I think he rather meant your God is the true God. But I like the idea of saying the Lord your God is truth. Okay, I thought we'd pause here a little bit. I've been mouthing off perhaps more than I should. And I want to open up for your ideas or your reactions to the notion of individualism, which of course ends up with the movement to the common interest. I'm not stressing the common interest, but that is there if one becomes a full individual. One moves up to the commonality which we all share, but it starts at the individual level. Okay, Hillel or Myra, do you have any reactions? And I ask you, in terms of my hearing problem, to speak slowly and loud if you can.
I am noticing that I'm 77, so I'm somewhat familiar with 1950s language, but it is not fitting for me today that the goal should be what it means today. Self-fulfillment sounds to me like happy, I should be happy. But I think I want to test what I'm hearing you say, because what I think I hear you say is what I say, why we have so many prayers for peace, because only in a time of peace can each individual bring forth the gift that they have to the community. When you're in a time of unpeace, you're struggling, scrapping to get by, and you cannot exercise your generosity or artistic expression or something because you're in a hand-to-mouth situation. Is that what he means? I'm kind of having trouble with. I've heard those words, for years and years, but I'm having trouble understanding what he means by salvation or self-fulfillment or actualization.
Well, see, my problem, I consider you quite young because I am 88, verging on 90, which scares me to death. Death, I think a lot about death. But the point is, for some reason, the issue of growth still it makes a great deal of sense to me. To grow, this session that I'm offering you today, I couldn't have offered 5 years ago because I didn't quite realize that Kaplan is not interested in happiness in a pedestrian sense, but he's interested in growth. He's interested in creativity, and this is speaking to you and working out my ideas, which I do very often with my brother, who I'm very, very happy is here, is my creativity. And what Kaplan said is he said that the creativity of the individual is a social gift. In other words, when we are individually creative, we are raising the level of our social group, whatever that might be. So I think that's really what Kaplan has in mind, and your idea, moving up the moral scale. It's very interesting to me that Maslow, at the end of his life, posited a level above self-realization, self-fulfillment, and yes, and what Kaplan, what Maslow said is it's altruism. We have a need to be altruistic. Okay, I didn't mean to react so long. Hillel, please come in.
First of all, thank you for your great presentation. One thing stood out to me right at the beginning when you talked about shleimut, which, self-realization. I would say that today we would probably understand that as wholeness, becoming a whole human being. And I think that was what Kaplan had in mind. And, and it's interesting that there's a kind of a verbal similarity. I think from a Kaplanian point of view, holiness is wholeness. That when you become a full self-realized human being, that's the aim. The second thing that struck me is one of your...
If I could just interrupt you for a second, Hillel, you are channeling Kaplan. because very early on I discovered a prayer. He talked about wholeness and holiness at the same time. I
Right.
don't know where it's somewhere in my computer.
I don't remember either. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing, I think the second text that you had up there struck me about Kaplan saying the role of, in a sense, what you said, the role is not to continue to be Jews, but it's to continue to apply Judaism to the world in which we live. That's not the way what you said, but I think that's the idea. And in a sense, that is the Kaplan, I think, championed universalism as opposed to particularism, and saw the Jewish people, its role to be universalistic rather than particular, and which is a great thing. The third thing, and just it struck me,
if I could interrupt you again.
Sure.
That the universalism was very, very, very basic to Kaplan from the very beginning. I not emphasize that at all. That's another presentation, but it is very, very, very basic to Kaplan.
Yeah,
yes.
in a sense, it's rejection of the chosen people, which really sees the Jews in a particularistic way, as opposed to being a choosing people, which is much more universalistic. The last thing, and forgive my rambling on this, but when you talked about the aim of religion in that last one of the texts, is the perfection of the individual. One of the things that I remember Kaplan teaching about is he defined religion. I've used this phrase many, many times because I agree with it, is the role of religion is the education of the conscience. Rather than anything else. It's and that, in a sense, is what you say, the perfection of the individual who acts on his or her conscience, educated conscience. I don't want to say much more about that, but I've always resonated to that Kaplan phrase of the education of the conscience as the true role of religion.
Can I just expand on what you just said? The SAJ celebrated 100 years of its existence, and they asked me to do a talk, a keynote in a conference that they had. And I went back and in my closet, that wonderful closet that I have, that gives me all kinds of things. I found the talks that Kaplan gave to the SAJ when he organized them in 1922. He gave a series of talks to describe to them what he was about. And what emerged from those talks was a concept which he called lifelong moral education, lifelong moral concern. In other words, he was defining Torah, and what he meant was that the rabbi should speak from the pulpit about moral and social issues, and the moral and social issues of his time, for example, were unions. And even though he had in the congregation the owner of Crawford Clothes, you remember Crawford Clothes was Joe Levy, who was a member of his congregation, who came to Kaplan, and he said to Kaplan, "Don't speak about unions, speak about Judaism." And
yeah,
Kaplan,
what's the difference between the two? This is
Yeah.
such a rich interchange. I do want to welcome Gail Schuster-Buskala, who just my good friend and colleague, who's joining us from Israel. And I want to reiterate, hi Gail, for Alan and Caitlin, we consider you not just guests or facilitators on this call. If you have comments, you certainly can join in. Mel, I'm sure you would agree with that. And I have a few comments. I see myself as a participant as well. I do want to comment on something Meira said and then bring it back to an issue of 21st century psychology, as I understand it. Meira, it's legendary that Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, once said of the assertion of English utilitarianism, of the English philosophers, that people are concerned about, we should be concerned about happiness. Nietzsche spoofed, he said, it's not man, human beings, who are concerned about happiness, it's the Englishman who's concerned about it, which signaled a rift between continental philosophies and European. And indeed, it's an open question. There is within utilitarian philosophy a kind of argument. Jeremy Bentham is the founder of it, and he talks about the famous greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. And the popularizer, John Stuart Mill, pauses and begins to say, well, what is happiness? And makes distinctions between what we might call a lower form of happiness and a higher form of happiness. And I want to bring into the mindscape we're creating the work of a American psychologist, analyst, social commentator who worked for many years at the University of Pennsylvania, Philip Rieff. And Philip Rieff wrote a number of volumes. The two classic ones are Freud, The Mind of a Moralist, very valuable book, and even more importantly, The Triumph of the Therapeutic. And that's where I want to introduce this as part of the dialogue. Rieff in that book said, you know what? People do have a need to be part of a group. It's important for their individual happiness. They can't be an individual without a connection to the group. So in the course of a long therapeutic dialogue with your therapist, he might say to you, you need to make some connections. You're living too isolated a life. But to me, Rieff ends up being critical of that because it's a means to an end. And what I see as the Kaplanian game and challenge is that we're doing both at the same time. We're looking for Shleimut, but part of the Shleimut is a deep, deep connection to the Jewish people. It's not an instrumentality, as if we belong to the Jewish people, then we can be, as Will Herberg would have it, right? Just like our Protestant and Catholic neighbors, we have a church and an affiliation. It's deeper and bigger than that. So while I relish in Mel's corrective and brilliant scholarship and pointing to the focus on the individual, I don't want to lose sight of the dance between the two, because I think both goals are holy and part of our holiness. So that's my more than 2 cents, my 10 cents worth.
Yeah, well, no. I agree with you 100%. This presentation is very partial in a sense. In other words, I emphasize the individual, but the group and group life and group values and so on and so forth is so central. I thought Gail Schuster-Buskila might want to say something. I talked about Kaplan not being a statist Zionist, but thinking of Jewish civilization and its values of equality and democracy being above the state. And I thought, in light of the crisis of Israel at the present moment, the opportunity to hear a few words from Gail is not something we should, it's something we should take advantage of. Gail, would you like to say a few words?
I would like to say that I'd like to separate two things. The years that Kaplan lived after the creation of the State of Israel and the books he wrote, as we all know. I don't think it's clear that he only spoke about Israel as a non-state. This is what I believe from the New Zionism that he wanted, which is unfortunately hard to find in the modern era. He wanted an ethical nation, and that is my favorite book of his. I mean, Judaism as Civilization is very important, and I mean, I've read, you know, I also listened to him for many, many years, and the fact is he lived here pre-state and post-state, and the fact that he didn't manage or want or wasn't able to live here either time for the rest of his life, as it were, because in those days, in the 30s, it would have been a long time, is irrelevant, because he saw this. I believe that he was always a Zionist. There is no question in my mind that he thought that we needed an entity here. What that entity is, I think that he left Magnus behind. From what I read, he left Magnus behind because, of course, Magnus wanted something that he wasn't willing to talk about now, which is oddly probably on the table here for those people like me. That has to be a combination. But I would like to be able to identify the state of Israel as an ethical nation, and right now I'm hard pressed to do that. During the Trump years, I wasn't so thrilled with what was happening in the United States, so I don't know how any nation is ethical when we talk about the things that happen that are realpolitik and all the other problems that we have. But my feeling is that it's hard to take someone who finished his writing career. When did he write Religion of an Ethical Nation? In the
1971.
That's a long time ago. But he had been working on a new Zionism for many, many years. And he had programs that he gave, as we know, to the Zionist conferences. I think he was basically pro the continuation of the Jewish people. And my fear, and this is the fear of, I believe, all of us, is that we don't know what that means when we talk about the world today, with the amount of assimilation that goes on outside and the problems that are happening here politically. We are in a very, as far as I'm concerned, a very uncertain period of time. And negating either side, which I mean, there's so many negative things that I can think of. I spend a lot of my time protesting. I have a call in a little while with a group from Israel that's working on more protests, and it's a very big problem. I think that Kaplan, and somebody said in some sort of thing that Kaplan would have been pro this or Kaplan would have been pro that. I don't think we can say that. No more than we can say that Freud would have been this way or that would have been that way, or even Stephen Wise or Abba Hillel Silver, all these people who had been Zionists and very active Zionists and pro-Israel, one can not even say that that would be the way they would go. I would like to say that the pro-continuation of the Jewish people around the world would be what Kaplan would think. That's what, but the challenges that each community has, I mean, I believe that I don't know if there still are, but there were Jews in Ukraine and they must have gone through a terrible period. I think, as a matter of fact, I saw a Zoom between the conservative movement and some Jews in Ukraine. I can't imagine people in Russia who are Jews. The challenges now are huge, and I don't think it's one diaspora versus another. I think it's worldwide, and we're in a tumultuous period. I don't know. Maybe I've gotten it wrong, but I don't know. But again, religion of ethical nationalism is my hope. I think it should be our goal, but I'm not sure how that goes.
Yeah, no. Anyway, I have great respect for Gail because, excuse me, because many years ago, she put her money where her mouth was and made Aliyah. Excuse me.
Do you want to go get a drink of water?
Yeah.
Okay. While you're doing that, I'll go right back to Mel. I need to be the cheerleader for the Kaplan Center and remind folks here that there's a wonderful webinar scheduled for April 22nd. Michael
Right.
Cohen will facilitate it. Gail is a member, and it's four Kaplanians, five actually, four of them rabbis, rereading the New Zionism for what it says to us today. So please be sure to be with us. Mel's had his drink of water. It's back to you, Mel.
Yeah. No, the Kaplan, the phrase, the religion of ethical nationhood, really is a way of talking about Kaplan's philosophy altogether. In other words, one might say that he interprets the Torah itself and the covenant as ethical nationhood. In other words, to be a member of the nation is not simply to be loyal and to have a patriotic attitude and to act in a patriotic way, but it is to incorporate in one's life the values of justice and the values of equality. And that is the meaning of ethical nationhood. So I appreciate Gail's emphasis on that issue. In the little time that we have left, I want to switch the subject very dramatically to the matter of prayer and to say a few words about prayer, because I think it is very problematic to followers of Kaplan and to Reconstructionists in general. I think we might start off with Alan Miller, who was the rabbi at the SAJ. Perhaps Hillel, you know of him. And he was an English Jew and a very strong supporter of Kaplan. He talked about the service being divided into three equal parts. There should be quotation, which is all the Psukei de Simra, et cetera, the Amida. There should be 1/3 quotation, 1/3 affirmation, which is really quite a lot of new prayers and new liturgy, which we can affirm. And the last third should be conversation. I like what Miller is saying and hope that we can push that. Now, in terms of affirmation, I want to bring up a number of examples. And so can we have text number 4? Kaplan was not known as a pious person, as a religious person, but he was, and piety was at the center of his notion of what religion is and was and could be. And he opened up his class at the seminary frequently with a prayer. And this is the prayer: from the cowardice that shrinks from new truth, from the laziness that is content with half truth, from the arrogance that thinks it knows all truth. O Lord of truth, deliver us. Now, this illustrates to me the exact meaning of what prayer ought to be to a Reconstructionist. In other words, we're not asking to be given anything. We're not praying to God, even though we say, O Lord of truth, deliver us. What we're what we're doing is we are turning the focus back on ourselves. And so this affirmation, which I want to substitute for the word prayer, this affirmation is of elements in ourselves that we would like to focus on. So we want to rise above cowardice. We want to rise above laziness. We want to rise above arrogance. And what could be more important than that? In Kaplan's, we can go back to the regular screen. In Kaplan's quest for new liturgy, what he did is something very, very special. Caitlin, we could go back to the, what he did was very special, which was to take essays and turn them into a prayer. Myra, what are you saying? We are desiring change for ourselves. Yes. Yeah, we don't change the world, we change ourselves. Myra, if you want to say something, please say it. The chat in terms of the speech is very distracting to me, and I can't, it interrupts my train of thought.
Okay.
So if you want to say something, just raise your hand and say it.
Forgive me for using the chat. I totally understand. I'm still trying to get comfortable with that term self-realization, but I think that prayer is such a great example. We're not, as you say, we're not asking God to give us something, but we're asking for ourselves to grow. And when we reach that point, we will be, I think, more of what I'm asking, if this is correct interpretation, will be more of what Kaplan is describing as self-realized.
Yes, in other words, to overcome cowardice, laziness, and arrogance is certainly to move up in the ethical scale.
Okay.
Now, Kaplan discovered Heschel in the early 1940s. Heschel came to this country in 1940 to Hebrew Union College, which rescued him and other scholars and rabbis from the Holocaust. He was uncomfortable there. In one service, they asked him to remove his yarmulke. And the cafeteria at Hebrew Union College was not kosher. And so Heschel was not really comfortable. He published his first article, which was called An Analysis of Piety. Piety being the word that he used for the religion of the individual. We would talk about spirituality. He talked about piety, and Kaplan loved that term, and he loved that essay. I recommend to you that you take a look at that essay, which is in Susanna Heschel's book, Moral Grandeur and Spiritual Audacity. And the essay and analysis of piety is there in its complete form. So Heschel and Kaplan got to know each other as a result of that essay. And when Heschel came to New York, he met Kaplan. And years ago, I discovered a letter that Heschel wrote to Kaplan when he went back to Cincinnati. Kaplan was, of course, working on the Siddur in 43 and 44 on his Siddur, which appeared in 1945, and because of which he was excommunicated. So apparently they discussed this, and that letter that Heschel wrote to Kaplan contains a knock your socks off Heschelian line, in which Heschel said that prayer is not a matter of nusach. It is, what we need is a community of kavanah, a community of kavanah. And I am absolutely sure that Kaplan would agree with that formulation of what prayer is, a community of kavanah. Now, the point is that Kaplan, in his quest for a new liturgy, took the essay on piety and made it into a poem. The idea of taking an essay and creating a poem out of it is a Kaplanian desire to create new liturgy. Now I'm going to read to you part of that poem. The language of the poem is Kaplan, is Heschel. The language of the poem is Heschel. The poem is Kaplan. So let's have that. I didn't give you that whole poem, but only part of it. Caitlin, no, this is, I'm sorry, Caitlin, it's my fault. I didn't give you to put up the Heschel poem, but let me just read you a little bit from it. What is piety? Is it the abandonment of the world? Is it scrupulous performance of rites or fanatic zeal? Let us observe the pious man and probe into his soul. Pious woman also, of course. What we shall discover in it, that which transcends man and woman, that which surmounts the visible and available, steadily preventing him from immersing himself in sensation or ambition. We tend, in other words, I want to distinguish between the lower self, the Yetzer Hara, and the Yetzer HaTov. Kaplan is the philosopher of the Yetzer HaTov. We are drawn every single day and every single minute to the Yetzer Hara, the lower self, the selfish self, the narcissistic self. And what we have to do, even though we are ambitious, is to not yield to that passion. Now, I want to run to the last text, which has to do with piety, and that's the religion of the individual. The religion of the individual. You see let's read it together. The positive effect which religion is expected to have on the individual is or has been in the main piety. Hence, all parlance on the subject of religion suffers from an inherent confusion between the social manifestation of religion, which is the matrix of piety, and piety or religious experience, which is the individuated expression of religion. That's the thing that jumps out at me and what I see as important. Accordingly, piety or religious experience should be defined as the individual function of religion in a way that involves a highly emotional attitude and a sense of commitment. The emotional desire and commitment to the group, commitment to the higher values, commitment to the community. I see we lost Hillel. I think we also lost my brother. I know
Yeah.
we have to leave.
Alan left a bit ago. Hillel asked me to convey a message, which he said, wonderful. He was very stimulated and appreciative. He had to drive to another appointment. So you should properly understand his absence. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, this last paragraph really sounds like it's from Heschel altogether. It's Kaplan's spelling out of piety. Religion is a matter of belonging. Piety is a matter of believing, which is surprising to come from Heschel, from Kaplan. Religion is prose, piety is poetry. God and religion is what the flower is to the botanist. God and piety is what the flower is to the poet. God and religion is the power that makes for salvation, which is Kaplan. God and piety is any being from God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to any being whose presence was or is experienced with what Otto calls the overwhelming sense of the numinous. The numinous, that word is a popular word for the divine in our experience. I was at the Jersey Shore a week or so ago. Nobody goes to the Jersey Shore in March. It was cold and snowy, but I got up one morning and saw the sunrise, which was a numinous experience, an experience of the divine. It was overwhelming, and it happens every day. So I want to end with that kind of notion. Myra, do you have any final reactions? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yes, no, you're not putting me on the spot. This has been very helpful to me. And you're reminding me, when I was at RRC, I had a part-time job in the Kaplan archives, and I held some of his letters in my hand that he had written, where I actually wrote a paper on one where he's beginning to use the word civilization, where he's coming to that idea. But this has been helpful to me, because the words, they're one reason philosophy is difficult is because they use words that I don't understand, and this has really helped me to understand what he meant by self-fulfillment or development. And I want to say to you, Mel, that I will further this learning that I'm taking in will go out further, because I will do some teaching, and maybe I'll check in. I know I'll check in with Jeffrey and perhaps with you to make sure my ideas are correct. But this is going to be very helpful to my community that doesn't understand what Reconstruction Judaism is. So
I am reminded of a situation and of an event in connection with the Kaplan archives, which was absolutely transcendent. You know that Kaplan created this Heschel poem, and it ended up as part of the prayer book. He called it The Pious Man. and it's in the 1945 prayer book. Kaplan also created a poem based on an essay from Emerson, which is the 1838 Divinity School essay by Emerson. And that essay and that poem by Kaplan was of a major influence on me, because if Kaplan said to me that I should daven from Emerson, that's really what he was saying to me, because he intended to include it in the prayer book, but he didn't. I had to read Emerson, and I read Emerson essays, Emerson criticism, Emerson biographies. I spent 15 years knee deep in Emerson, which was very, very important to me. And then at the end of that, I was in the Kaplan archive, and I found in the papers of Ira Eisenstein a prayer book from the early 1940s. What the SAJ did is they had a, sorry about that. They had a loose leaf prayer book. The loose leaf prayer book is a perfect illustration of Kaplan's mind, because you can take things out and put things in by just clicking it. It's one of those 3-ring.
We're old enough to remember.
We all did that.
What I found in the loose leaf prayer book was a page where Emerson and Heschel were facing each other in the prayer book. And I'll tell you, I started to cry. It was such an unbelievable event, such an unbelievable experience. And if there's anything that the word divine means, that's really it. So anyway, I thank you for being able to end with that story.
If, with your permission, can we check in with Gail and Caitlin to share some final impressions of what they've derived from today's talk? Sound good? Okay. Caitlin or Gail?
Mel, thank you so much for this. I have a couple questions. I mean, the presentation was incredible. And one of my questions is about what Kaplan would have thought when it comes to, the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Schleimut. Especially when we think about contemporary life, but even life during Kaplan's period, people have restrictions when it comes to the resources that are available to them and the paths that they can pursue. Did Kaplan think that there was a particular direction or avenue that one should pursue when it comes to achieving self-fulfillment, or that there was a particular avenue, for example, a direction that one should put themselves towards and prioritize their placing their skills towards in order to bring wholeness and wholesomeness towards themselves and their community and others?
Well, I think Kaplan was a pluralist.
Mm-hmm.
He was very, very deeply a pluralist. In terms of religion, he believed that all religions basically strive in the same direction. He believed that one could be an Orthodox Jew and a Kaplanian at the same time. I don't want to mention his name, but I recently discovered a fellow in Israel who is a Haredi and at the same time is a dedicated Kaplanian, which I think the Messiah is not far away if we can have a Haredi who was a Kaplanian. And he is very much a Haredi and very much a Kaplanian.
Wow.
So, I think that's the thing that I like is the Kaplan's emphasis. I have to find my own way. You have to find your own way. Myra, you have to find your, and Caitlin and Jeff, and they're all different, but they're all valuable and contribute to the generality of the ethical nationhood of the Jewish people.
May I add something here? In my own language, I would say that God gave each of us special qualities. And what he's trying to say is when we can actually rise to actuate those special qualities in their best form, I think that's how I'm interpreting salvation or fulfillment. That when each person has the context in which they can actually bring forth their special God-given qualities. I'm going to use that term.
Thank you, Mayor. I would add, I'm rereading Kaplan's chapter on Jewish education in Judaism as a Civilization. Kaplan lived way before John Gardner and our theories of multiple intelligences. However, those 5 criteria to which we add something for a successful Jewish education are nothing if they're not multiple pathways and the ways in which multiple intelligences might find their way to a deeper Jewish connection through the arts, through ethics, through Jewish civic engagement. It's rather remarkable and important. So thank you for reframing it that way. Gail, do you want to check in with us before we move to the...
Because what you've just said is the basis of so many Reconstructionists' connection to Tikkun Olam. Because it is not just what we are inside, it has to do with as you used to talk about when we were working together, actualization of values, that it's not just that we are internally good and we don't step on bugs. It has to do with what we do. No, I know it's extreme, sure. but I wasn't always sure about Albert Schweitzer. But in any case, the idea of what religion is supposed to do for us. And I believe that this is exactly it, is the Tikkun Olam comes from what we do as self-actualization for people and as taking our values and bringing them out to the world. And I believe quite strongly that that's what Kaplan did. I think most of the frustration he had was when he found that people didn't understand that. And maybe his language wasn't as beautiful as Heschel, but it wasn't just enough to be reflective and self-fulfillment, but Tikkun Olam. And I guess that's why pretty soon I have to go on to my next call, because Tikkun Olam is so important, and it's something that he was so involved in himself. And it doesn't really matter what you do, if you're in climate change or in Zionism or just making sure, the children get enough to eat in many places around the world. So I think that this is a wonderful combination. Right. Thank you very much. Really.
So I want to end with 3 quick observations. A thank you to Caitlin, and of course, a huge thank you to Mel. The first observation is that I think I'm right, that sometimes fewer people going deeper and sharing more of their story is very important. The other proverbial other hand is this is so rich, it redoubles my commitment to finding ways to share it with multiple audiences. I think people will get a great deal of all the effort you put into this, Mel. And the third thing I want to say in conclusion, that the Mel Scult chapter in my life, I'm thinking of I love basketball. I'm part of March Madness, so I'm using a sports metaphor. That chapter is still 100% Mel. I've never attended a webinar with you or a lecture where I didn't walk away enthused and more knowledgeable. And that's the MS. I believe that I wouldn't distort the truth here. So thank you for not surprising me and keeping the record at 100%. So I want to thank.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Okay.